This is 11-year-old Audrii Cunningham. Her story isn't about a stranger in the dark, it's about a danger that was hiding in plain sight. A man the system had every opportunity to stop. Today, we're uncovering 5 devastating failures by law enforcement, the courts, and the community. Failures that didn't just let Audrii down, they sealed her fate. These weren't isolated errors. They were systemic breakdowns that allowed a known offender to live just feet from a child and be trusted with her care. This isn't just the story of a crime, it's the story of a tragedy that could and should have been prevented. Before we get into the failures that ended her life, we have to remember Audrii for how she lived. She was a 5th grader, known for a bright smile, a kind heart, and a spunky personality that left a mark on everyone she met. Photos show a girl with a twinkle in her eye, usually in a hoodie, who loved animals and dancing. Her family described her as a happy child, loved deeply by her father, grandparents, and mother. She was a daughter, a granddaughter, a friend. Her life was full of promise, full of dreams that were stolen in the most brutal way imaginable. On the morning of February 15th, 2024, Audrii was supposed to catch the school bus. It's a simple, everyday routine for millions of kids, but she never made it. When she didn't come home that afternoon, a horrifying reality began to sink in. She was missing. An Amber Alert was issued and a massive search began, drawing in law enforcement and volunteers from all over Texas, all clinging to the hope of bringing her home safely. 5 days later, on February 20th, that hope was gone. Audrii's body was found in the Trinity River, her small frame tied to a rock. The cause of death was ruled homicidal violence, including blunt head trauma. The man responsible was Don Stephen McDougal, a 42-year-old who was considered a friend of the family. He lived in a trailer on the same property as Audrii and her father and was supposed to take her to the bus stop that very morning. McDougal was arrested and charged with capital murder.
The man who murdered an 11-year-old girl in Livingston last year will spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. We're talking about 43-year-old Don Stephen McDougal, pleading guilty to the murder of Audrii Cunningham earlier today. Fox 26's
In January 2025, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. But justice for Audrii isn't just about locking one man away for life. It's about understanding how he was allowed to get so close in the first place. And that brings us to the first, and maybe the most catastrophic, mistake. The single greatest failure in Audrii Cunningham's case is a legal one, a gaping loophole in the Texas Criminal Offender Registry that allowed a known child predator to remain invisible to the very people he would ultimately destroy. The man responsible for Audrii's death, Don Stephen McDougal, was no stranger to the justice system. His record was long, but one case from 2007 should have been a chilling warning of the tragedy to come. That year, McDougal was charged with indecency involving a child. The victim, a 10-year-old girl named Carissa Davis, bravely reported that McDougal had tried to pull her pants down. The intent was clear, the danger was obvious. This was a man who preyed on children. But what happened next is where the system's failure began. Instead of being convicted of an offence that would have required public registration, McDougal got a plea deal. He pleaded no contest to a lesser charge, enticing a child with intent to commit a felony. At the time, under Texas law, that specific charge did not require inclusion on the state offender registry. That was the loophole, a legal escape hatch that let McDougal plead to a serious crime against a child without triggering the single safeguard designed to warn the public about people like him. He served 2 years in prison and was released. While his criminal record was visible to law enforcement, the label that should have followed him everywhere, the public registry alert, was missing. Fast forward to the years before Audrii's death. McDougal, a friend of Audrii's father, needed a place to stay. Wanting to help, Audrii's family offered him compassion. They let him live in a trailer on their property, just yards from their home. But they weren't reckless. They did what any parent would do. They checked the state offender registry. They searched his name, looking for any red flag, any reason to worry. They found nothing. His name wasn't there. Audrii's grandmother, Tabitha Munch, later said with heartbreaking clarity, that was the only reason he was allowed to stay at our house. We were asked and we agreed to help him, and we've suffered the consequences. Her family's trust wasn't blind, it was betrayed. They were betrayed by a legal system that created a category of crime that let a predator hide. In their eyes, and in the eyes of many, Audrii wasn't McDougal's first victim. Her family has said, "Our granddaughter was the second victim of his, because of a loophole in the law that allowed him not to register." You simply can't overstate the impact of this failure. It was the foundation for everything that followed. It placed a dangerous man in a position of trust and proximity to a child. It gave him access. It gave him opportunity. The family thought they were helping a friend down on his luck. They had no idea they were inviting danger into their lives, danger that the justice system had effectively disguised. This one legal oversight erased his most serious history, leaving the Cunningham family and Audrii herself completely vulnerable to the threat living right outside their door. The legal loophole gave Don Stephen McDougal cover, but the second critical mistake falls on law enforcement. It was a systemic failure to see and act on a clear pattern of escalating, dangerous behavior. McDougal didn't just commit one offence in 2007 and then lie low. He was a repeat offender, with a rap sheet that should have been a screaming alarm bell for any agency that dealt with him. Since 2001, McDougal had been arrested at least 14 times for all sorts of charges: violence, theft, antisocial behaviour. But the most critical piece of his history, the 2007 crime of enticing a child, seems to have been lost in the shuffle. Different police departments dealt with him for different incidents, but it seems like nobody was putting the pieces together to see the whole, deeply troubling picture. He wasn't just a thief, he was a man who had already proven he was a known risk to children. This failure of risk assessment became tragically clear in the hours after Audrii vanished. The day after she went missing, but before her body was found, McDougal was arrested on a completely unrelated charge of aggravated assault from 2023. Think about that. At the most critical moment, with an 11-year-old girl missing, law enforcement had the man last seen with her in their custody. This should have been the moment everything clicked. A deep dive into his background should have immediately flagged the 2007 child enticement case. The nature of that offence, involving a 10-year-old girl, was an undeniable parallel to the current situation. An 11-year-old girl was gone, and the man in their jail cell had a history of targeting minors the exact same age. But it seems that connection wasn't made with the urgency it deserved. While McDougal was named a person of interest early on, the full weight of his past wasn't immediately used to escalate the investigation. That delay may have cost precious time, and in a missing child case, every single minute counts. That time could have been used for more intense interrogation, for search warrants based on a much stronger suspicion, or to focus the search on areas connected to him instead of the wider, less targeted search around Lake Livingston. For days, the search for Audrii was massive, but it was also widespread. Investigators followed leads and combed huge territories, while the man who held the answers was already in a jail cell. The dots were all there, scattered across years of criminal records. The 2007 case, his long rap sheet, the fact that he was the last person to see Audrii, and his arrest the very next day. Failing to immediately connect these dots was a major investigative misstep. McDougal wasn't just a person of interest, he was a blazing red flag in a missing child case. And for a crucial period of time, it seems no one saw the smoke. This third mistake is uncomfortable because it moves beyond laws and police work into the messy world of human relationships and trust. It's about the oversight by the community and, to some extent, the family, who unknowingly let a dangerous individual into their inner circle. And this is tough to talk about because it's not about blaming a grieving family who were lied to by the entire system. It's about looking at how the first two failures created an environment where normal human trust became a deadly weakness. Don Stephen McDougal wasn't some stranger who snatched Audrii from a park. He was a family friend, a man who had woven himself into the fabric of their daily lives. Living in a trailer behind their home gave him constant access and a false air of legitimacy. He was part of their world. He was trusted enough to sometimes do one of the most sacred things a parent can ask of another adult: take their child to school. This trust was built on a lie that was backed up by the flawed state offender registry. The family did their homework, but the system gave them a false all clear. With no official warning, they were left to rely on their personal judgment. And McDougal, like so many manipulative individuals, was probably a master at putting on a helpful, harmless face. Still, there were quiet signs that something was wrong. It has been reported that some family members, like Audrei's great-uncle, had an uneasy feeling about McDougal. It's that nagging intuition that something is off, a feeling that's hard to explain, especially when there's no hard, barred evidence. Without an official warning from the registry, it's easy to dismiss those instincts. To ask yourself, am I being paranoid? He's a friend. The system says he's fine. Maybe it's just me. This is where community vigilance comes in. We've come to rely so much on official systems to protect us that we sometimes stop relying on our own instincts. The lack of a formal warning can feel like permission to ignore our gut. No one, not neighbours or school staff, had any reason to question McDougal's presence in Audrei's life, because the very systems designed to raise those questions had already failed. This mistake highlights a painful dilemma. The family's trust was a direct result of being misled. But it's also a devastating reminder that even when the system seems to give a green light, our intuition and extreme caution are safeguards that can't be replaced. That uneasy feeling was a tragically accurate read on McDougal's character. But without a criminal record check that told the whole story, it was just a feeling. McDougal exploited the family's kindness against them. He used their charity, giving him a place to live, as a strategic advantage for what he intended to do. Before we continue to the next point, if you believe these stories have to be told to help drive real change, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us demand accountability and keep fighting for victims. When Audrii Cunningham was reported missing on February 15, 2024, the clock started ticking. In any missing child case, the first 48 hours are the most critical for bringing them home safely. The response has to be fast, focused, and smart. The fourth critical mistake here was a delay in treating Don Stephen McDougal as the number one threat, which led to a search that wasn't as focused as it should have been. From the very beginning, the facts pointed a finger straight at McDougal. He admitted he was the last person to see Audrii. He was the one who was supposed to get her to the bus stop, and she never made it. His dark blue Chevy Suburban was one of the first things police asked the public to look for. In any investigation, the person last seen with the victim is always suspect number one. When you add his long criminal history, especially the 2007 conviction for enticing a child, McDougal should have been treated with the highest level of suspicion from the second Audrii was reported missing. But the initial response didn't seem to reflect that intense focus. An Amber Alert went out and a large-scale search was launched, which was the right procedure. But the initial physical search seemed to cast a wide net across broad areas, mostly near Lake Livingston and the Trinity River. While that area was ultimately where Audrii was found, the strategy seemed to be unfocused, rather than a targeted hunt centered on the most likely suspect. Resources were poured into searching huge, remote areas while the man who almost certainly knew where Audrii was not yet the singular focus. Of course, McDougal was questioned. He was a person of interest from the start, but reports say he gave conflicting stories that had holes in them. Instead of being immediately detained and put under the intense pressure reserved for a prime suspect in a child disappearance, he was, for a time, just one piece of a bigger puzzle. As we said, his arrest the next day on an unrelated charge was a stroke of luck, but it proves the point. He wasn't initially held for his reported connection to Audrei's disappearance. This lack of a laser-like focus on McDougal may have had critical consequences. First, it may have given him time to get rid of evidence, time to better hide Audrei's location, time to get his story straight. Second, it spread out the investigative and search resources. When you have a suspect this strong from hour one, the strategy should be to work outward from him. Search his properties, track his every move, and put relentless pressure on him. It's easy to say now, but the clues were all there on day one. The last person to see the child had a criminal history that included a crime against another little girl. That combination should have triggered an immediate, aggressive, and suspect-focused investigation. The delay in treating McDougal as the prime suspect, instead of just a person of interest, was a miscalculation in prioritizing threats. It was a mistake that may have extinguished the final chance to bring her home. The final mistake happened after Audrei's body was found, after Don Stephen McDougal was charged with capital murder, and after the terrible truth was known. This is a failure within the justice system itself, a structural limit that left Audrei's family feeling that even in the end, true justice was just out of reach. McDougal was charged with capital murder, the most serious charge in Texas, which carries only two possible sentences: life in prison without parole, or the death penalty. Given the severity of the crime, the killing of a child, many people, including Audrii's family, felt the death penalty was the only fitting punishment. Her grandfather's words to McDougal in court were raw and clear. "May you face the consequences of what you've done for the rest of eternity." But the prosecution quickly hit a legal wall. The Polk County District Attorney's Office announced that McDougal was not eligible for the death penalty. The reason, they explained, was his significant and documented intellectual and developmental disabilities. Under the law guided by the U.S. Supreme Court, executing someone with such disabilities is considered cruel and unusual punishment. While McDougal was competent to stand trial, meaning he understood the charges and could help his defense, his intellectual capacity was below the line required to impose the ultimate penalty. This legal reality tied the prosecution's hands. With the death penalty off the table, the only other outcome of a trial would be life in prison without parole. To spare the family the trauma of a graphic and agonizing trial, prosecutors accepted a plea deal. In January 2025, McDougal pleaded guilty to capital murder in exchange for a guaranteed sentence of life in prison with no chance of parole. Legally, the outcome was a win for the state. It secured the maximum punishment possible and made sure McDougal would die in prison. Polk County DA Shelley Sitton said, "This resolution ensures Don Stephen McDougal is being punished to the fullest extent that I, as a state prosecutor, have available to me." But for Audrii's family and a horrified public, it felt like a hollow victory. It felt like one more system failure. How could a man be capable enough to plan a kidnapping and murder, to hide his past, and to lie to police, but not be considered capable enough to face the full consequences? It raises profound questions about how our justice system defines disability, especially when it comes to heinous acts of violence. The focus on McDougal's disabilities, while legally necessary, risked overshadowing the harsh reality of his crime. The plea deal, while practical, prevented a public trial where all the evidence would be laid bare. It left the family feeling that justice was incomplete, that the man who took their daughter's life was, in the end, shielded by the same system that had failed to protect Audrii. Out of the immense darkness of this case, a powerful movement for change was born. Audrii's family, devastated by their loss and enraged by the failures that allowed it to happen, channeled their grief into action. They refused to let Audrii's death be just another tragic headline. They were determined to build a legacy for her that would protect other children. Their mission was clear: close the loophole that let Don Stephen McDougal live among them undetected. Their fight led to Audrii's law. The family, especially Audrii's grandmother, Tabitha Munch, became tireless advocates. They traveled to the Texas state capitol in Austin to testify, sharing their raw pain to drive home the need for reform. In a powerful plea, her grandmother told lawmakers, "I'm not only asking, I'm begging that we close this loophole, and we make sure that my granddaughter's death is not in vain." Their voices were heard. Lawmakers on both sides were moved by their story and the undeniable logic of their argument. The bill, formerly House Bill 2000, was simple and direct. It would expand the list of crimes in Texas that require mandatory sex offender registration. Specifically, it added offenses like child grooming and ensured that a conviction couldn't be plea bargained away to avoid registration.
Developing news out of Austin today. The Texas legislature has officially passed Audrii's law. Named in memory of 11-year-old Audrii Cunningham, the law strengthens protections for children by tightening parole guidelines for violent offenders and improving tracking of high-risk individuals, requiring people who've been convicted of child grooming to register as a sex offender. Supporters say it's a critical step towards preventing future tragedies. Governor Abbott is expected to sign the bill into law later this week.
The bill sailed through the legislature. In May 2025, Governor Greg Abbott signed Audrii's law, with it officially taking effect on September 1st, 2025. The passage of Audrii's law is a monumental victory and a testament to her family's incredible strength. Andy Cahan of Crime Stoppers of Houston stated, "The sex offender registry is one of the only tools families have to protect innocent children. This law strengthens that. It directly fixes the primary failure that put Audrii in danger." Let's be clear. Had this law been in place back in 2007, McDougal would have been on the registry. Audrii's family would have been warned. He never would have been on their property, and Audrii Cunningham would almost certainly be alive today. This new law is Audrii's legacy. It is a real, tangible change born from an unimaginable tragedy. It can't bring Audrii back, but it now stands as a shield for countless other children across Texas. Her family's fight has ensured that her name will forever be linked with protection, vigilance, and with making the system stronger and more accountable. When you look at what happened to Audrii Cunningham, you see a brutal chain reaction of failure, a legal loophole, an investigative blind spot, a betrayed trust, a delayed response, and a handicapped justice system all cascaded into the most devastating outcome possible. Each mistake was a weak link. Together, they created a perfect storm of negligence that allowed a predator to walk right through every safeguard we think protects our children. Audrii's life was not a statistic. She was a vibrant, loving 11-year-old girl whose future was stolen. The pain of her loss is a harsh reminder that our laws, our institutions, and our communities are only as strong as their weakest links. The passage of Audrii's law is a vital step forward, a testament to her family's resilience. But the work isn't done. This case is a call for a complete re-evaluation of how we handle child predators. It demands better communication between police agencies, a greater emphasis on listening to our own intuition, and a justice system that puts the safety of children above everything else. Let's remember Audrii Cunningham not just for the way she died, but for the beautiful, bright life she lived. And let her memory be a permanent call to action. We owe it to her and to every child to be more vigilant, to demand more from our systems, and to never stop fighting to close the gaps that let the monsters in. Thank you for joining me as we looked into the heartbreaking story of Audrii Cunningham, a case that reminds us how vital it is for systems meant to protect our children to never fail them. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share. It helps this channel grow and ensures more people hear these important stories. I'd also love to hear your thoughts below. Was there something in this case that struck you most, or another story you believe deserves its own episode? I read and reply to all your comments. I'll see you again very soon. Until next time, stay safe, stay kind, and never stop listening for the murmurs of crime. Bye for now.